In this video, I'm going to help you to understand the type of challenge and probing questions you can expect in a proper job interview. And for simplicity purposes, I'm going to structure my content into the STAR format. So what types of questions you can expect with respect to the situation and task, then focus on the questions you can expect on the action, and then finally with the results. Okay, so starting with the situation and task. The number one thing people could benefit in presenting their situation and task could be specificity. Okay, so questions such as where did this occur, when did it happen, and why is this important? Okay, so specificity is something that many interview answers could benefit from, and if you include these specific details in your answer from the first shot, then that would be beneficial to your overall performance in a job interview. Now, of course, there is a careful balancing act, whether that's to your advantage to mention when it happened, and as you'll see next, but still specificity is the number one thing I want to talk about here. Second challenge questions, or I should say probing questions here. What were the risks and potential consequences if nothing happened? Okay, so why would someone ask you this? Well, if your story is a bit flat and basically you're not convinced yourself that this was actually something you had to get done, chances are this wasn't sufficiently interesting as a story. And believe it or not, there are candidates who would say something on the lines of, hey, I think you're right, actually, it wasn't really mandatory, we did this. Okay, so this is basically a shoot yourself in the foot type of scenario, which you of course want to avoid, right? And the third challenge question I want to talk about here is, could you come up with an example that is more recent? Okay, why would someone ask you this in a job interview? Well, the scenario is this: in a behavioral interview, they would screen you on your past experiences so they can predict your future performance on the job, whereas the older the story, the less likely it's a convincing one. Okay, and if you remember in the beginning I said specificity, where, when, and why is something that sells best. With respect to the situation and task, it's of course a trade-off to the extent it's to your advantage. If you think that this example is an excellent story you have, but it happened a long time ago, maybe don't say when it happened, right? Because it's less relevant if you say, hey, this was 15 years ago. Okay, but still a challenge question, especially if they don't like your answer, they would ask you for another example, right? So for you as a candidate, you have to prepare multiple stories, ideally, for answering these interview questions based on core competencies and your functional expertise, right? Second, with respect to the action part of your story, what type of questions or follow-ups or challenge questions you can expect here? This is the number one place where they would want to deep probe your functional expertise. Functional expertise or core competency for the given role, right? Functional expertise could be your coding skills, core competency could be your interpersonal skills. Okay, but this is the one place where they would want to dive deep and ask you many questions about these specific matters, right? As you would expect, I cannot get too specific with these things. It differs, the functional expertise or the assigned core competencies from role to role, but expect to be okay. Are you good for the job or not? This is where I'm going to. Okay, another interesting one would be, what were the most significant obstacles that you faced in achieving whatever you talked about in the results, and how did you overcome those obstacles? So most of the time people focus on how they actually were so successful in the project and so on and so forth, but they omit talking about the actual obstacles which happen. So be prepared to talk, hey, there's no such thing as the perfect project or initiative if you don't work in projects, but you must face some obstacles, and there must have been something that you did to overcome them. Maybe you came up with an innovation, maybe used your interpersonal skills, but obstacles. Yeah. Okay. And one more here in terms of a challenge questions. Did you challenge any decisions? If there was a decision involved, and how do you influence the right outcome, right? So this is a bit complementary to the significant obstacles you face, but how did you influence the right outcome is a question that I believe makes sense in many interview answers, right? So, of course, a director level role would use different skill set to influence the right outcome than a software engineer, maybe, right? There could be some overlap, but still, you understand that's why I'm not insisting on specific examples of a time when you influence the right outcome. Still, I believe it's a super valid challenge questions with respect to the action part of your story. Okay, and number 3 is with respect to results. Okay, so the number one thing you want to be careful with respect to results is how did you measure success for the project or operation or initiative? What results did you achieve, right? Metrics, quantifiable information, ideally, right? With the note, of course, that it's to the extent it's to your advantage. You would never want to use a metric that's not to your advantage. Like the simplest example is, iPhone 16 was recently launched and they have a larger battery, which they said improved battery life, but they never mentioned by how much, because it wasn't a feature, It didn't play to their advantage to quantify that necessarily, right? So results you should ideally quantify to the extent it's to your advantage. In the same way, in the situation and task, I said specificity sells. When did this happen? To the extent it's to your advantage. If it's too old, maybe not insist on that aspect, right? Now back to the results. Another probing question: why did you focus on these results? What other results were important? Okay, so if we ask Apple, okay, why did you focus on saying it's larger battery? What other achievements were important, right? So oftentimes there are multiple directions where you could quantify success at different levels or in different directions on the initiative or project that you're working on, right? But you should have prepared different types of ways to quantify these results or to speak about results if quantifying them is not to your advantage, right? And finally, what trade-offs did you have to make to achieve these? Okay. As I just said previously, there's no such thing as the perfect project or the perfect initiative. So there must have been some trade-offs between, quality, cost, or time, or each of these, and you must prove your point that, hey, yes, I delivered in spite of those trade-offs with high quality and in time, or, whatever the main thing was in that. But there usually has to be a trade-off to achieve the desired results in some initiative you've had. And also maybe another one, a bonus item here: what would you have done differently if you had to do it all over again? Right? Because on the same topic, there's no such thing as the perfect thing, the initiative. So what could improve if you had to do it all over again? This was the challenge questions with respect to the results part of your answer. Now, I want to give you another insight here as a closing remark, is that in a behavioral interview, the difference between a technical and a behavioral interview is that in a technical interview, basically, if you know the questions in advance, you're assumed to give the perfect answer always. In a behavioral interview, I can guarantee you that I could give you the questions in advance and yet still not do that well in a behavioral interview, right? So the main goal of providing with this insight is that by understanding is to help you to understand why a question gets asked and what are the levels of success to the best possible interview answers. So I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.